Okay, we're all set.
Good evening, City of Kalamazoo. My name is Pete Eldridge. I'm the Assistant City Planner. And tonight we are doing a town hall discussion to talk about the downtown zoning amendments proposed. So welcome to our panelists and those listening and viewing this presentation tonight. The format for tonight will be a presentation to start with of the proposed updates, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. As far as providing questions for our panelists tonight, there are multiple ways to do that. You can go to hello.kalamazooCity.org. That's hello@kalamazooCity, all one word, .org. You can post on Facebook event page. You can call the number that's shown on the screen, or for those listening that aren't viewing this, that number is 269-226-6573. Again, 269-226-6573. And when you call that number, please leave a succinct voicemail message with your question about the downtown zoning amendments that are proposed. And those questions that we do not get to tonight, because there always is a few of those, we do plan to post a question and answer online early next week. So any questions we don't get to, we will early next week. And our panelists, I'll just go through a brief introduction here. And as I say the panelist name, please give a little background about yourself. We'll start with Andrew Hahn from Downtown Kalamazoo Partnership.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Hahn. I'm the president of Kalamazoo Downtown Partnership. We are a 501c3 that administers two public authorities for the city of Kalamazoo. We do economic development, events, marketing, public space improvements, and public engagement, and all things that try and help build a great, beautiful downtown for our community.
Thank you. And we have Kathleen Widener with us this evening. She is a downtown business owner.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Widener, and I am co-owner of the Spirit of Kalamazoo. My husband, Andrew Widener, is the other co-owner. We've been in downtown Kalamazoo. It'll be 9 years this October. And we've been in our current space since 2016, which is right on the Kalamazoo Mall between the Radisson and Gazelle Sports. And we sell Plainwell ice cream as well as local t-shirts and gift items.
And if you haven't been there yet, you need to stop there.
That's right.
Okay, and then we have Kurt Ardema from AVB Development.
Hi, I'm Kurt Ardema. Like Pete said, I work for a company called AVB. We are a local construction and development company. We partnered with the Hinman Company to develop the 400 Rose project at the corner of Lovell and Rose in downtown Kalamazoo. It was under construction for the last couple of years and opened this past March. And we look forward to doing more projects in downtown. From a personal standpoint, I also serve on the Downtown Coalition for Place and have served on the Kalamazoo Historic Preservation Commission for a number of years, as well as Metro and the Central County Transportation Authority Board. I also live in the city of Kalamazoo and am a regular visitor to downtown. Thanks.
Thank you, Kurt. And then our city staff on the panel tonight, we have Christina Anderson, city planner, and we have Clyde Robinson, our city attorney, present. And with that, we are going to move into our presentation for the first portion of the town hall meeting tonight.
Okay, Andrew, I'm gonna cue it up for you right now.
Great.
There we go, I think it's up.
That is. Well, there's our intro slide, and you see all kinds of great things in our downtown. Scenes from the mall, the East Gateway, East Michigan, and the Radisson there. So we're so excited to work with the city and the community on this. Christina, you can go to that first slide. So why are we updating the code? There's a few things. One, I want to drive home about what zoning does. Zoning does not drive the market. We have a great market for development within our downtown. That's very evident by all the new construction that we've seen in recent years, much of that housing. What it does do, however, is ensure that the new development that comes to downtown is consistent with that vision that the community spent so much time and effort sharing with the city staff through the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 project. So we know that we have great housing needs within our downtown. We know that downtown is a place where a lot of is really the economic engine of our community, our greatest employment center, a place that has a tremendous mix of uses from civic, cultural, our anchor institutions, retail, restaurants, and again, it's really an emerging neighborhood. So we need to make sure that the development that comes supports that vision and helps us realize a active, inviting place for everyone that does all those things, it visits for whatever need. And we also need to make sure that it supports access for all travel modes. Many of you may be familiar with the process that the city is working on right now in partnership with us and many other groups and stakeholders to rethink the downtown street network. It's an incredible kind of once in a generation opportunity. Having taken those streets back from state highways and thinking about how we turn those back to local streets that really support a sense of place and all these different uses that we have downtown. So using our zoning to make sure that the buildings that come relate to the street types in an appropriate way. So one thing I wanted to mention too, I said that we have this great demand for housing. Christina, will you go to the next slide?
I just did.
Oh, sorry. So what this does is it helps us really think about the form of what's downtown. I'm probably getting a little ahead. I think that's on the next slide, but it's a point I'd like to make. We know we want housing downtown. Well, what if somebody came along and wanted to buy a piece of downtown, a piece of real estate downtown or land, and build a really big, fancy, expensive single-family home? Well, that really wouldn't support the vision for what we need downtown. It wouldn't draw visitors, it wouldn't draw employment, etc. So we know we need housing. This will help talk about what type of housing. And similar with other building types. Something that I think is really critical is this will help us consider the impact of buildings, especially on the first floor and how they interact with the public. So we have a couple buildings, and I won't name them, and they were built under decades and decades ago under old zoning that have an entire block face that is just a blank wall. And that really doesn't lend itself to a sense of place or a feeling of safety or drive that traffic that we want downtown. So making sure that we have the right uses on the first floor that people are going to be engaging with and that will be active as many hours of the day as possible. We want to create clear standards with a more predictable outcome. So right now we have a downtown design review committee process that kind of layers on top of our zoning. And there's some, for lack of a better word, there can be some ambiguity in that process. It's not always crystal clear. We want to make sure that when we're trying to attract development and new investment into our downtown, that process is clear, understandable, and laid out in a way that people can navigate easily. And that really gets to that next bullet, to streamline review and approvals. We don't want development to be onerous in downtown. We've heard from the community what the community wants. We want to make it easy for those that are looking to invest in our downtown to help proactively bring those uses that that the community's asked for. And likewise, there's a recognition that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't the right way to achieve that vision. So we have that right now. I think Kathleen is going to talk a little bit about that. We have one zoning district for our huge downtown, and there's a lot of different character within our downtown. Christina, will you go on to that next slide?
Yeah. And would you like to talk about what zoning is, or would you like me to?
Oh man, I thought that was mine. I'll just add one point and then I'll let you do it. So
Absolutely.
I was just simply going to say that, zoning doesn't, the zoning that we have and that is being proposed at least, doesn't dictate the style of a building. So we're not telling people that, they need to build a neoclassical building or they need to build a modern building. It regulates these things here that Christina is going to talk about.
Thanks, Andrew. That's a really good point, and we should make sure that we touch on that later. But before we go through this process to talk about what's being proposed to update the zoning from downtown, I think it's important to stop and talk about what zoning actually is. And Andrew hinted at a couple of these. Zoning is a set of rules about how land can be used and developed. It talks about what uses are allowed and how they're allowed, if there's any restrictions or parameters on them. Zoning lays out building location, both building location as well as driveways and parking lots within a lot. Finally, zoning also can regulate form, and in our code it does. These are things like height, entrance location, or what we call transparency, which is the ratio between a window and the building face. And we just mentioned that, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're activating that ground floor, which is what people pass by. It's what sparks people's interest. And if we have long stretches of blank wall, if there's no clear entrance into a building, then people start to lose interest in the area. Zoning really should support whatever the master plan's vision was. We have a new master plan from 2025, or through 2025. We have been working to update the zoning throughout the city since that time, piece by piece. And it is time to update what is downtown. It's been in place since 2005. And I want to touch on these last two things, and Andrew started to talk about this already. Zoning is the base layer. It is only the foundation. And that's kind of why I have this graphic here. There are lots of other pieces that come into play when one is opening a business or doing a project. Financing, construction, design, employees, all those other pieces. Zoning is simply the base layer, and we want to make sure it's right, because if you hit a hurdle at step one, knowing all the other steps that you need to get through to do a project, then you might become discouraged and not continue on, or really sets a tone for not, a great project process. Second of all, zoning is not a cure-all, but simply a piece of the puzzle. It's not no switch is going to be flipped. That a business is going to come back that was no longer there. That's not the way zoning works. Again, it just sets the foundation for what moves forward. And right now, we really have a one-size-all approach, right, for downtown. All of that red that you can see on the map in front of you is our current commercial community business district. And it treats everywhere the same, whether it is on the mall, whether it is Cooley Street or Lovell Street. And that we have found over time presents some challenges. In addition to that, we have found that there's some leftover manufacturing that still exists within the downtown and adjacent to it that is not able to support residential development or a mix of uses that you would typically find in and around an urban downtown like Kalamazoo. And we have other districts that kind of surround downtown that are also not aligning with that urban active character. So in the light pink, what we call community commercial or CC, doesn't allow residential on the ground floor. And it really, is set up to be used on streets that are higher speed and larger lot development, and not the smaller parcels that exist in and around downtown. Commercial neighborhood and commercial office are two other districts that exist in and around downtown that both allow a narrow list of commercial uses and not as flexible as we would like. And they limit residential as it exists on the ground floor. And, Kalamazoo has a pattern on a lot of its streets that goes back and forth between commercial and residential. That is Kalamazoo's pattern. And we need to make sure that we are allowing that to continue and grow. So, how do we start to kind of untangle this one-size-fits-all approach? The districts that maybe aren't as supportive of the downtown. And what we've done is, with the community's help, start to divide. We'll start with just the red area, the community commercial, or the CBD district, commercial business district, divide it into 3 smaller districts that allow us to take advantage of understanding the location and the context to set our standards. So the first district that we're going to talk about, and let me first say that this is a lot of information, and I appreciate that this is a lot of information for someone to absorb if you have not been involved in the process or only been involved a little bit. All of this information is always on our website, which is imaginekalamazoo.com/projects/downtown zoning. A recording of this presentation will also be available later, so you can take some more time to digest the different districts and what it means. So the first district that we created is Downtown 1, and it's meant to be the entertainment, the dining, the shopping, the urban core. Really, the first floors of these buildings are characterized by storefronts. We would provide windows into the stores and the dining spaces, and less active uses like residential units are on the upper floors or in the rear of a building. You're typically not going to find surface parking lots in this area. This is our, business after business flow, active, principal shopping area. The second district we created kind of creates a layer around that. And I've tried to highlight it with a dash line. This is Downtown 2. So these are districts that are just off that main principal area. They also provide for a mix of uses on the first floor. Lots of different commercial uses are allowed in Downtown 2, but also we have the opportunity to have some residential, some civic or institutional on the ground floor, and not just those retail service commercial uses that we talked about in Downtown 1. Again, surface parking is while it might exist, is going to be limited in this area to make sure that it is not interrupting the street and the pedestrian pattern, traffic flow that exists in and around this area. And then the remainder of downtown became Downtown 3, which really is a district that's meant to serve as the edge of downtown as it transitions into the adjacent neighborhoods. North Side, East Side, Edison, Vine, West Man Hill, and Stewart, if we were kind of going around the clock around downtown. And so flexible list of uses, including a lot of housing opportunities here, including attached or row houses, something that we know is missing from our market, and allows things in a size of building or a scale of building that works with that transition to the adjacent areas. Now, I mentioned that we looked not only at the downtown, but at some adjacent blocks to downtown to make sure that those uses were supporting downtown with a mix of housing and smaller commercial opportunities. And so there are 3 additional districts that are being proposed in and around downtown. All of these districts are currently mapped in other places of the community where the downtown districts are new and are not mapped. So the first district, which is that purple, light purple, is called Live Work 1. And Live Work 1 is similar to Downtown 3, but it takes another step down in terms of size and scale. We can start looking at single family dwellings in this area, as well as residential multifamily duplexes and small apartment buildings. On the southeast end of downtown is Live Work 2. It's the darker purple. And that was used in this area because this area is a mix of a little more intensive commercial and some industrial is in that area. And Live Work 2 is a district that allows a mix of those. And then finally, we are proposing some residential multifamily. And I'm going to circle it for you so you can see where it is, because it's just a few lots. And what these are, kind of looks funny that it's just a handful of lots. These were lots that were zoned commercial district when the rest of the block was residential, or the rest of the block was used as residential development. And so in this area, it's kind of repairing the zoning pattern that exists in the area. So there's just a handful of lots. And so that is part one of our project, which is redoing the zoning map for the area. Now that's part one, because what comes with that is making sure that once we have those districts divided by character, by size and scale, that we have the right set of uses and the right set of standards to make sure that we're meeting the vision for those districts. And so that's what we're going to start to talk about now, is the two kind of prime pieces of zoning. One, which everyone is very familiar with, which is uses. What's allowed where and what standards are tied to these uses. This is what most people think of when we talk about zoning, is, oh, well, what use is allowed. But in addition to that, we are really going to be focusing a lot on our standards, including, building height, the location on the lot, and the treatment of that ground floor facade. So before I get into the details of what's being proposed for the uses in this district, I'm going to let Kathleen talk a little bit about the importance of ground floor uses in the downtown.
Thank you. So the way the current district is, it really doesn't differentiate between areas. For example, downtown versus the edge of downtown. As you had seen on that map, everything was all red. Uses such as residential, parking lots, gas stations, car washes, church assembly, they're all currently permitted everywhere. And we know from other downtowns, and as a business owner, that when we locate a string of retail, entertainment, and service uses in a row along a block, it really helps make it inviting and active and engages people. And that's the whole point of a downtown, is to be engaged and come downtown again and again. And, uses that have limited hours, such as maybe they're only open on Sundays or only open on, the morning, or things like that. They don't generate then a lot of foot traffic. Residential, if it's on the ground floor, then creates dead spaces along a block, and then that impacts the behavior of those people walking the block. And this is definitely true if the space is just used for parking. So that's something else that is always brought up in a downtown, especially Kalamazoo, and something that, we're thinking about in terms of this whole plan and zoning. So when we divide the downtown into multiple districts, it will allow a more narrow focus on retail, entertainment, and service uses to be placed on the core shopping and entertainment blocks. And that will be, a consistent space after space of active businesses, which will add to the vibrancy of the street. And then looking beyond the core, the mix of uses will be more flexible, and that will allow residential and civic uses on the ground floor if that is something that's wanted or needed. And as I had mentioned, parking lots, being a regional downtown, parking is very important for customers who are traveling in. But it's so important to locate it so that it doesn't impact the vibrancy of our downtown. And the same is true for residential development. We really want people living downtown, but in a variety of housing styles. And we want them, if they're in the D1 district, not on the ground level, we want them, upstairs or in the rear of the buildings.
Thanks, Kathleen. And so to kind of give a little more detail on what's being proposed versus what exists today, the reality is that the permitted uses between the current central business district and what's allowed in downtown 1, 2, and 3 is very similar. What is different is that it's treated a little bit differently in some districts rather than others. And Kathleen mentioned a couple examples. So right now, residential development is allowed on any lot in downtown on any floor. So it could be right against, the back of the sidewalk, first floor, it could be upstairs, it could be in the back. And we know kind of from best practices that if you're going to designate kind of, your key shopping, entertainment, retail area, that, thinking about not allowing residential in those same spaces can help prevent creating dead zones in the pedestrian realm, pedestrian pathways you're walking through the area. So in D1, our downtown 1 district, residential is allowed, but it is upstairs or it's in the back of the building to make sure that we are providing accessible units. And in D2 and D3, it is allowed. And as Andrew alluded to, this code really starts to think about the form and the type of buildings. And so, D2 allows residential, it could be on the ground floor, upper floors, but it's probably going to be in a more of apartment style building, where downtown 3 around the edge as we merge into the neighborhoods could be a mix of residential types, including attached or row houses. Religious assembly is another use that's treated a little bit, it's adjusted in this proposed code. Right now, permitted on all lots in downtown, whereas we are looking at not allowing it in downtown 1 and making space for it in downtown 2 and 3. And again, that's tied to the activity of the uses and kind of the symbiotic relationship that happens between your retail, service, shopping businesses are open all day long activities. Parking, Kathleen alluded to parking, and there were some pictures on the previous slide about what a surface parking lot can do to a block in terms of its invitingness or appearance. When we talk about parking, we are talking about standalone parking, meaning a lot that is only used for parking, not parking that might occur on a lot with a building. So just to be clear, we talk about standalone parking. Right now, a parking lot could occur anywhere in downtown. The proposed code does not allow any standalone parking in downtown 1. That means if someone wanted to do some sort of, say, a parking ramp that fell into downtown 1, it would need to be combined with other uses that would wrap the ground floor along the street. In downtown 2 and 3, parking lots are permitted, whether they're surface or standalone, but right now they're proposed to not be on corners and not front our priority streets. We talked a little bit about at the beginning of this presentation that we're really thinking about land use and how it relates to our streets. And so this code ties many standards to our street types. Our priority streets in downtown are Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo Mall or Burdick Street, and the first block of Portage Street. And so again, we're really looking at trying to get to support our economic vitality in downtown, making sure that we're allowing for the right mix of uses in the right place and radiating out from the core, increasing flexibility. The thing that is very different from the current central business district uses and what's being proposed is the consideration to include marijuana businesses. Now, this past spring, the city had passed an ordinance to allow marijuana businesses in town, but specifically omitted them from the downtown so it could be discussed with this process. And so what is in front of you is how that discussion has gone thus far. So in all downtown districts, a retailer or provisioning center, which is a business that sells marijuana products, would be permitted. However, all the standards that apply to this use elsewhere apply here. So they must be 1,000 feet apart. There are 500 and 1,000 foot separation distances from certain protected uses that would need to be taken into account when a business is locating, including schools, parks, and daycares. And there's also a limitation in the code based on street type to make sure that it is on our primary streets and not turning the corner into our more neighborhood streets. The second marijuana use being proposed for inclusion is a designated consumption establishment. And that is a business that allows the consumption of marijuana product on site, not the sale of that product, however, just the consumption of it. This is also proposed to be permitted in all the downtown districts. The consumption must be done indoors. Its location is also limited based on the street type for the same reasons as I mentioned for the retailer. And it also is subject to separation distances from protected uses like schools, parks, and daycares. The third of the marijuana businesses that are being considered for downtown is what's called safety compliance. This is essentially a medical laboratory building, much like a medical lab. It is a laboratory, much like a medical laboratory. It is only permitted in downtown 2 and 3 districts, and it does have some limitations based on the street type. And so these are how these new uses have thus far shaken out, and where they would be allowed and under what circumstances. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, who's going to talk a bit about the second important piece of our zoning requirements, which goes beyond uses to look at buildings and building form.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, so zoning historically in the last 50 years or so has really focused on use, and I think most people are familiar with industrial and commercial and residential uses and kind of their basic form. What we're focused on here, though, is less on specifically what the use is and more on what the form is. We talked about what uses are being considered and permitted downtown, but this is more about the form and what the buildings look like and their shape and their placement. And when I say look like, it's more about transparency and connectivity to the street versus the actual architecture of the building. One of the examples that I like to think about if you're considering building form is if you think about the Kalamazoo Mall, where you've got outdoor dining happening now, a lot of it happening now. It creates almost an outdoor room where the buildings are tight up against the sidewalk. They're all 2 stories or taller for the most part, with a few exceptions, but they enclose that space. If those buildings were to be pushed back, say 10, 15, 20 feet off the sidewalk, it would really open that space and widen it out to the point where it feels more like a car-friendly road versus a pedestrian-friendly road. And if you compare Kalamazoo Mall to some of the bigger roads, Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo Avenue, King Highway, it certainly has that outdoor room type feel to it. And one of the ways it does that too is being close to the street, but also all of the glass storefronts and the transparency that you see. So in these examples in the photos, at the top, you see the glass is clear. You connect in a sense with the retail that's happening along inside of that building. It's tied into the sidewalk itself. Same for the second photo there. You've got a building set that's close up to the road, transparent glass, storefront displays, on-street parking, all the components that make it friendly for pedestrians. And a similar example on the upper right, where again, different form, but transparent glass and a connection with what's happening inside to the outside, which in a retail environment is usually good for business and it's good for the activity on the street as well. The lower set of photos, you see what would be a potentially historic building on the bottom left, and it probably had glass storefront in it at one point that connected to the street. It has since been filled in, and there's only really a little section on the corner that invites people to connect to that space. So you don't see people walking outside. You wouldn't really want to sit outside of it at a sidewalk cafe because there's just no connection. There's nothing welcoming about that space. It blocks the street view, even though the building's in the right spot at the corner. The middle picture on the bottom, this is pushed back off the street. I gave the example of the Kalamazoo Mall earlier. If the mall buildings are pushed back, this is a result that you get this wide open space, a lack of connection between what's happening in the stores to the street traffic out on the road, whether that be pedestrian or cars. That connection doesn't happen because the building's set so far back off the road. So bringing that building closer in the downtown environment promotes walkability, and in the end promotes retail because it creates that connection with the space. Picture on the bottom right, this one's interesting. One of the things we noted was the glass is there on the first floor, the glass is there on the upper floor, but there's no transparency. They're essentially a mirror to the point that the person taking the photo can actually be seen in one of the panes of glass. So it acts in essence like a wall and does not create any type of connection between the inside and the outside of the space. So if you're a retailer and you're trying to draw people into your store, that tint on the glass acts as a wall in essence, regardless of what it looks like on the inside. On the outside, it says people aren't welcome in the store, or there's no reason to come into the store. Another example I like to talk about is the residential type buildings. So Christina mentioned that we have residential buildings that historically have been kind of intermixed within downtown. The downtown core for retail, we might say, is the Kalamazoo Mall, maybe Michigan Avenue, but residential jumps in pretty quickly as you come out of those core areas. The picture on the upper left is actually a project that I was involved in. I mentioned the project at Level and Rose in the introductions. And when this was designed, it has a residential first floor use, but again, the intent here was to keep the use and the building close to the street, but provide a little bit of separation. So there's still a connection with the glass and the stairs directly to the sidewalk, but there's enough separation that as a resident, you have some privacy. It's elevated a bit above the sidewalk grade. This was a model actually that we found as we looked at brownstones in examples in places like New York City and Chicago, where those have historically been used for well over 100 years. And that model was brought into kind of a contemporary format. But the building placement, the connection to the street were all used regardless of the contemporary architecture and materials. You can see similar on the bottom left. Again, they're multifamily residential building, residential on the first and second floor. The steps connect down to the sidewalk, provide access to the sidewalk, provide some connection to the public space, but also some privacy by elevating the residents up above the sidewalk. Same in the middle. I mentioned earlier, I served on the Historic Preservation Commission for a number of years, and the building in the middle was built probably 80 to 100 years ago. And even though it's set back off the sidewalk a bit, it still provides that connection. You can see the pedestrian walking by. There's not a wall out there that would block them. There's a fence, but it's transparent, and there's a bit of elevation between the main entrance of the building and the sidewalk itself. Similar with the building on the upper right, again, a multifamily connection to the street, a little bit of setback to give a little bit of separation, but it's a great way to bring housing into an urban setting on a downtown edge. So, and the last example I'd like to give in terms of form, when you think about building that outdoor room, an example is a national example. If you think about Central Park in New York City, which is not comparable to Kalamazoo, but it creates that wall around the park, and it creates what's in essence an outdoor room. And what makes that park special is the building form that happens around it. And if that same park were in the middle of a field, it wouldn't have that same importance or significance that it does on a national and international level now from a design standpoint. So that sense of place that's created there and created in a lot of these buildings in these photos is done with partially with the use, but also the use is not as relevant if the form and the building shape don't fit that model for pedestrian focused urban development.
Thanks, Kurt. And that's a great segue into, understanding these concepts, understanding that we're talking about downtown where people come to live, work, play. They come because it's memorable. They come because it has a context, and that can be done because of the relationship between the building and the public spaces. The use is important, but it's only one piece, right? And we know that in Kalamazoo, we have this pattern where uses, we have a mix of uses on the same street outside of our downtown core. And so again, that's where the form becomes really important to set the tone for that street. So let's talk a little bit about what's different in understanding that we are prioritizing that. Let's talk about what's different between the current central business district and the proposed code. So first, it's been mentioned a couple times tonight that there's a set of downtown design review standards that exist. And a lot of the form standards that we've talked about, transparency and small setbacks and building placement, have, for Kalamazoo, a lot of those have existed there and not in our code itself. We are proposing for those to be merged, so they are a requirement of the code, eliminating that separate review process. So these are not necessarily new standards for Kalamazoo. They're kind of in a different format in a different location. When we pull some of those form requirements into the traditional zoning code to be merged with height and parking lot location and driveway location, we definitely have tried to provide a little more detail so there is no ambiguity in what is being asked of a property owner. We use in addition to it being slightly new and a different format, there are some different tools. An example that you'll find as you go through this, and instead of a setback, which says you must locate your building no closer to the front to a property line than this line, and we don't care where it is beyond that. In order to get that predictability, in order to be within our historic development pattern, our context for downtown, we use a tool that's called a build-to zone, which differs based on the type of development that you're doing, but it's a set range that says your building must be located within this range, the front of the building. And that's how you get some of that, again, that predictability and thinking about context and our pattern. We've already talked a lot about the relationship between streets and that requirement. Some of the development requirements are tied to the type of street that the building is being located on. You know, the other big difference is that this code is very heavily illustrated, and I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. Instead of text or a table, the new standards are listed in a format like this, where there's a table and then an illustration with that table. So it looks new, but it's tried, and new sometimes is hard to process, but what we've tried to do is make it as user-friendly as possible. So if you're looking for where to locate your building, either off the front or the corner of your lot, you go to the table. It has number 4, so you can go right down to the picture and see exactly where you're talking about it. So it's defined right there, and you don't have to flip to other pages, and everything you need is in front of you. This is done, including when we start to talk about some of those requirements that we pulled from the Downtown Design Review, things like entrances and transparency. You know, there's an illustration, the text is tied to a graphic, and really tried to think about the type of building that's being developed. You know, not every building will be a storefront building. Unless you're in downtown 1, because that's what that area is. But outside of that, there's flexibility. So they are set up so you can understand if you're building a building or rehabbing a building, what your requirements would be for that ground floor facade or building face. The other big difference is height. And so I wanted to make sure that we call it out today. We are proposing that height will be regulated by number of stories and not by a number of feet. So instead of something like 35 or 50 feet, it would be you are allowed a certain number of stories. And they are linked to the location in downtown and the street type. So right now, height is in downtown is set with a kind of the whole of the donut, allows unlimited, there's no maximum height. And then everything outside of the whole of the donut in the downtown allows a height that is 2 stories taller than the tallest building within, I think it's 200 feet. Instead, what we have said is something a little more certain, which says if you're on one of our priority streets, and we talked about this before, where they were located, I've highlighted them in yellow, then that is your area of no max height. And then moving around that into our downtown 2 district that's not on the priority street, up to 9 stories, and then moving out further up to 5 stories would be your max as you start to go into our neighborhoods in all directions. So again, I and everyone on the panel fully appreciates that this was a lot of information, but we wanted, We, because of COVID, are not able to come and do meetings in person. So all of our engagement activities have been online or paper surveys. We wanted to have the opportunity to kind of put it all together for folks to listen to and start to digest before we move on to a more formal review and approval phase at the Plan Commission and City Commission level. So all of what we just talked about is available on imaginekalamazoo.com. You go to the projects page, there's a tab at the top, and then you go to downtown zoning. And that will give you drafts, full drafts of the code. There's like a snippet of the use table. There's little descriptors of the different districts to allow you to be familiar with them. And then there's also information on how you ask questions once you've reviewed that. And with that, I think we are about to start our question and answers from those that we have received during this presentation and earlier today.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to our panelists who provided a little color to the code, which may be a little hard to just read and digest. So now that we've brought the presentation to a close, I do want to remind our viewing and listening audience how they can submit their questions for tonight's town hall meeting. The first way is you can email those questions in to hello@kalamazooCity.org. Again, that's hello@kalamazooCity.org. The posting of questions on Facebook event page can be done, and we have our phone number that's shown on the screen, 226-6573. Again, 226-6573. And just leave a brief voicemail message, and we will try to get to all these questions tonight. However, we most likely won't, and we do plan to post answers to the questions on our website early next week. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at some of the questions that have come in, and one of them has to do with concerns about downtown parking, or questions about downtown parking. And the question is, many think parking is a problem in downtown now. What is the impact of limiting the development of new parking lots in downtown? And I wondered if Andrew might want to take this one to start with.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can start, and certainly if any of the other panelists want to add to it, I'd appreciate that if there's a desire. So we're not trying to make it harder to park in downtown. I think the changes that have been proposed are all about having a downtown people will want to come to and will be okay with finding a parking spot. So we have, even before the pandemic hit, we've had an incredible surplus of parking. Most of the time our ramps are 60% full on a busy day, with the exception of maybe a couple days a year. So supply is not an issue right now. Making sure that parking is available, particularly our on-street parking, is really how we're approaching management. We have a new plan that has been developed over the last year and a half or so that we're looking forward to rolling out as traffic picks back up downtown. But it's very much a balancing act where we need to have the activities in our downtown. I just presented at a virtual conference earlier this week and talked a little bit about some downtowns historically. If you think about Detroit or Buffalo or Cleveland or others that really tried to beat the suburbs at their own game and have tons and tons and tons of free parking. And suddenly it became a situation where their downtowns were more parking than anything else, and there really wasn't even a compelling reason left to come. So we know that, I'll be candid, this is an issue that's never completely solved. If someone were to say, point me to a city that has fixed their parking problem, no one could. It's about managing expectations, making sure parking is available, easy, it's convenient and affordable. So we think this really is the best solution. If you think about great downtowns, be it on a large scale, somewhere like a Chicago, or a smaller, comparatively sized city like in Asheville, North Carolina, they're not full of surface parking in the middle of their core. So that's really kind of how we aspire to be. And I don't know if Christina or anyone else has anything to add to that.
I do want to just add that all of downtown is technically a parking exempt area, meaning that there is not a minimum amount of parking that you need to provide for your uses. So there are no changes to minimum parking requirements or that boundary through this process. What this process is looking at is making sure that when we locate parking, that we're doing it as thoughtfully as possible to make sure that it is not, creating dead space so that it serves a wide amount of uses. And again, a lot of our conversations have focused on parking that stands alone, right? If your lot allows, because of access or size, you can do parking for your own new business or residential development on site. We just ask that it be in the rear, and in some situations on the side is permitted. But again, the focus is trying to push that further away from the back of the sidewalk and really have the active uses in the buildings be located there.
Christina or Pete, if I can just add one more thing to that. So as we planned our project at Rose and Lovell, we had this type of zoning in mind because we knew this was coming, and we wanted to be in compliance for the most part with the zoning as we built the building. But I will say we went through the process of designing what would be kind of a form-based building, and yet still accommodated parking on the site for all of the residents in the building, with some space for some commercial use as well, and added I think a total of over 15 street spaces as well as part of the project. So we were able to build a structure that fits the form, is tight up against the sidewalk, has the mix of ground floor uses, and has all of the parking either at the rear of the building or underneath the building. So there is a way to do it, like Christina said. I don't think it's about eliminating parking and the need for parking, but it's about proper placement of the parking and where it can be located or where it should be located. And so as somebody who went through that process, we were able to make that work, because there still is a need for parking. But again, if all you see is parking, then there's not a lot of reason to either live or visit or work downtown.
I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to try to do something that may or may not work from a technology standpoint, but it's important to remember that, again, nowhere in downtown would parking be fully prohibited. It's how you do the parking within downtown, even in D1. And which is our densest district right in the core. There's a great example in Grand Rapids. And if you Google it, if you just Google 38 Commerce Grand Rapids, and I'm going to show a picture of it from my phone here, but if you can see it very well, that's a parking ramp. So 80% of the interior of that building is parking, and just two sides of it are lined with retail on the first floor, and then offices and residential as you move up. So we're not looking at eliminating parking downtown. It's just taking a more thoughtful approach to how you do it. And if you are going to build a parking ramp in the middle of downtown, then you wrap it so that it's something that people would want to walk past and would have other engaging uses. So I hope that I know this isn't a two-way, but or a conversation, but I hope that answers the viewer's question. And certainly, we work with Central City Parking to manage parking. So if anyone wants to talk more about parking, look me up. I'm happy to.
Thank you. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to keep moving down that form-based standards line. This next question is actually just that. It says, will the form-based standards included in the code make development more difficult? And I thought maybe Christina would want to jump in first on this.
Sure. So the code for downtown is in a new format. It looks different. It's arranged differently, and it's merging requirements that we did through design guidelines with code requirements. And I think that, you know, anytime you have something new, it feels harder, right? Because you have to relearn it. You have to think about how you look at the document. That's true for staff as well as for those that are using the code. So I don't believe that it's going to make development harder. I think that the hurdle to get over is looking at the document because it's new. Like I showed, it realizes that it's new, right? And tries to say very clearly, okay, you want to look at your front build to zone? Great. So front build to zone, here's the definition. Look at the illustration, find bubble 4, and it'll show you, you know, what area we're talking about. So we've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. And these standards then make the outcome of the project very clear and predictable. Guidelines, which is a lot of what some of this stuff was previously, allow for wiggle room. They allow for some ambiguity. They allow for some negotiation. And if it's something that we feel is important, and you know, at the city, we do feel that making sure that on key locations, especially in downtown, that we have the right building form, doors, windows, you know, making sure it's built back up, you know, as close to the street as possible. That is something that is important enough to put in the code itself. And I think it's important to also say that you can do any style building you want. We're not regulating any sort of, we're not regulating the architecture or design. We are regulating some very key aspects that are important, regardless of what your design is.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and as Kurt Ardema mentioned, the housing development at the corner of Rose and West Lovell Street is a good example of utilizing you know, that form-based code, you know, with that, or shall I say, standards of our form-based code that we are adopting, with the building set forward to the street corners and the what surface parking there is concealed behind. So yeah, a good example. I've got another question here. Downtown has local and federal historic districts. How does this zoning hurt or support historic preservation? I thought maybe Kurt might want to start us off on this.
Sure, I can try to give some feedback on that. So, and again, I've served as a volunteer on the Historic Preservation Commission. I am not trained as a professional preservationist, but I can give some feedback. So the downtown pieces of it are under a local historic district, which has its own set of regulations and standards that are required and require a review process. Other parts are part of the National Register, which don't have the same level of review, and other sections of downtown have no historic designation in any form. So there's a downtown design review guideline document, which has been mentioned in this meeting already, that has some level of oversight on what buildings look like in the future, what happens to those buildings, how buildings get developed. But again, it's a guideline and there's wiggle room on what happens and what doesn't. What this does is it takes the guidelines, it integrates them with the zoning code, the zoning ordinance itself, and takes those, in a sense, kind of protective measures that help to ensure that what's built in the future is complementary to the historic buildings that are in our downtown. And it doesn't necessarily add another layer of review or protection, but it does add on the historic buildings themselves, but it does add that in a sense connection to the context of what's around the area, and gives the opportunity for review to see that the form fits within those historic neighborhoods that may not be regulated by the existing local historic districts, and even the National Register districts that don't have that level of review. It gives that extra checkpoint of, does it fit within the context? And it allows us to kind of set the context as a community, as a city, ahead of time. So hopefully that tries to help answer it, but I don't think there's a lot of direct changes, but it adds that sense of the new development is going to try to be complementary in context to what's already been built from a historic standpoint. And Christina, feel free to fill in if you have other thoughts.
I thought your answer was accurate. It's what I would have said. Yeah.
I think that covered it quite well. Okay, we're going to move on to another question here. You mentioned a focus on active uses being important on the ground floor in D1. Why is this important? And I thought maybe Kathleen would like to take a stab at this one.
Well, in a downtown, your active uses are retail stores, restaurants, places that are open, I want to say at least maybe 5 days a week, if not more. And of those 5 days, open 8 to 10, 12 hours a day. And it's businesses that appeal to a majority, so that you get a lot of people coming downtown, visiting your downtown and enjoying it. And it feels vibrant and active.
And I would just add to that, if you have areas that are kind of your core, your principal shopping area, which we have designated in downtown 1, doing your best to reserve that space, that front of the building on the ground floor space that everyone sees as they walk by. It's what attracts folks as they walk down the street or driving down the street for active uses. Is what helps kind of invigorate or activate that public space and that street. It's really that kind of, we've referred to it a couple of different ways, a relationship between the buildings and the public spaces. We've talked about the inside room and the outside room and how they can be an extension of each other. And all those are what help lend it itself to be an active area. Now, you wouldn't want to put a restriction for, no residential on the ground floor anywhere in downtown, right? Because that wouldn't be appropriate. For example, as one use that's not, that is not as active, but you want to make sure that you pick the place that is your core, your principal shopping district, consider those regulations there like we did, and then be more flexible beyond that, because you need those other uses. Those are employment centers. Those are places that people come, even if it's once or twice a week. It's the places where people live, and all of those bodies are what support the businesses downtown.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And since there was some talk of adding marijuana facilities in these new zone districts, or some of these new zone districts, we do have a question here. It states, are CBD products regulated by the city like medical or adult use marijuana? And I don't know if Clyde would like to start this one off. Oh, he's got his hand up.
That
Okay.
was an easy one, as the state law prohibits local municipalities from regulating hemp or CBD products, which are the result of industrial hemp. So as long as the plant meets the definition of what hemp is, and there's a very low percentage of THC, which is a psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, then it's industrial hemp, and its CBD products, which are derived from hemp, can't be regulated by local communities.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank
We received actually several questions over the last week on that. asking with residents and business owners asking if CBD could be used in, salon treatments or food or whatever, just selling the products in general. And, did you need to be allowed for marijuana use to be able to sell those? And, Clyde has answered that question with the answer.
And basically it's regulated by the state, and there are some rules in regard to CBD. I believe that's been issued by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency within the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs.
Excellent. Okay. And our next question is more to addressing traffic-related matters. It says, how does the zoning impact adjacent streets? Will these changes include transit, lane use, bike lanes, traffic calming measures? So is there any looking forward to addressing, improvements on the different street types identified in the plan?
Sure, I'll start that one. So the zoning code regulates the development of lots. So the lots that exist adjacent to our public or private right-of-ways, our streets. So the changes that are being proposed in the zoning code would not impact the physical design or nature of the roadway or transit and those type of things. The 2025 master plan is where we really started to think about street types. And we did this so we could start to think about how all of our streets serve all users, vehicle, bus, bike, on foot. But each street type serves them in a different way, but everybody is made to be able to use that street safely. And that is where we start to think about, as we start to update streets. I think Andrew mentioned our street design process that we're going through in the downtown to review our network and think about one-way versus two-way. It is through what's in the master plan and the separate process that we'll start to think about what the actual design of the street is. The thing that would impact our kind of transportation network related to zoning is making sure that the zoning can help make sure that in the areas that we say are meant to be active walkable areas, that our land use matches that pattern. So there's no point in having a lovely wide sidewalk, for example, for people to walk down and lots of bike parking or a transit stop. If the building themselves are way far back from the street, don't have clear entrances, because then we're kind of at a mismatch, right? We're saying, yes, come walk here, but we're not providing the uses in the buildings to match with that. So that would be I think the biggest impact on our transportation network is just making sure that our land uses and our streets are kind of talking to each other and working together to create either an active walkable area, if we're talking about downtown, or when we start to look at other areas, other districts, if they're more vehicle heavy, making sure that we're not putting, small scale residential right up on a street that is 5 lanes, right? That would be a mismatch out on the edge of town. In the same way that, pushing a building back without a clear entrance would be a mismatch in the downtown.
Thank you. And we have a question here. This is more looking at the big picture changes that the zoning amendments will bring about. It says, what are the biggest changes from CCBD to the 3 new downtown districts?
I'll start that one, and then I would love if other people could chime in. So I talked a little bit about this. I think the downtown districts, the new downtown districts and the central business district both allow a wide mix of uses that would be appropriate in a downtown. I think the difference comes into play with First, how those uses are regulated. Again, thinking about location within the downtown core versus edge of downtown, and also within a building itself. We've talked a little bit about residential as a good example of this. There are places where residential is perfectly appropriate on every floor of the building. And then there are parts of downtown where it's appropriate on the upper floors or in the rear of the building, but not necessarily on the ground floor right adjacent to the sidewalk and the public spaces. And so that is definitely a difference, that it's calibrated a little bit differently based on location. The second difference, or kind of other category of differences, is the fact that it's form-based, right? So it looks a little bit different because it merges those downtown design review standards with kind of those items that are found traditionally in zoning: height, building envelope, and placement on a lot. And again, that too has been calibrated to Kalamazoo. You can have a form-based code that is very, very detailed and very, very specific, and does start to go and bleed into that design realm. We didn't do that. That wasn't what we heard. What we heard was making sure that we were making a code that would set our downtown up for success. And what are the minimum criteria that we need to start to do that, right? That relationship between the public spaces and the street, or public spaces and our buildings. And that means looking at the ground floor. That means looking at entrances, transparency. And that's why those items are put into our code itself.
I can just give an example too from our project at Rose and Lovell. So that one size fits all approach of no residential on the first floor, kind of a blanket application of that, required us to go through a variance process to get the residential uses at the south end of our project, and on the south end of Rose, and then on Cedar Street, which across Cedar Street are single-family, multi-family and single-family residential uses on the ground floor that have been there for both of those buildings, probably one close to 100 years and the other over 100 years. So there are uses that we are compatible with that are in the downtown and fit the form that we're looking for, yet under the current zoning that required us to go through a process to get an exception to do what we think matched what the neighborhood fit in that process. So this new zoning recognizes that that distinction between the downtown core, the Kalamazoo Mall, Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo Avenue, and then as you start to transition to the neighborhoods, as has been mentioned. So for projects as they come in that are new, to be able to have that be predictable and have that already distinguished on the map, that natural flow from the core to downtown 1 to downtown 2 to downtown 3 is having that in place without going through a variance process is better from a planning standpoint and more predictable for the community.
Okay, thank you. And since downtown design review guidelines were mentioned, I'm going to use that as a jumping off point for the next question. It says, what is the current role of the downtown design review guidelines? How will this change with the proposed update? Kind of an easy one, but I'll send that to Christina to start off with. Yes, actually, this is an improvement, to align the zoning ordinance more with the downtown design review guidelines.
Right. And I think Andrew talked really well about this at the beginning of the presentation, is that when you have multiple layers, albeit layers that are well-intentioned and all work, have the same end in mind, right? Sometimes there can be conflicts, or sometimes there are extra layers of review that are required, and you question whether or not they're necessary. And so the way downtown design review has operated is that a project, when it was going through, in order to be approved for site plan approval, you would need to make sure that you are also checking the box for downtown design review. And depending on the nature of your project and what was included in it, your review was either through the Downtown Design Review Committee, which meets Tuesday mornings when they have cases, or it was done through an administrative review for things like for signs. What we did was, take again those key characteristics, the ones that are most impactful to building development, and move those into the zoning code itself. So they will be required, it's required of you, and you would not need a separate review process to review those elements.
Okay. And this next question is, can zoning help to protect green spaces? I don't know if Andrew wants to comment, based on his work throughout the downtown.
Oh,
Sorry, I was muted. We had some police or public safety off solving, hopefully helping our community out in the background here. I'm sitting out on our porch. So I will probably toss to Christina on this a little bit in a minute to talk about the natural features protection stuff. But zoning could, there are ways in which the zoning code could protect green space and would prevent development of it. So there's also the layers that are in, City Attorney Robbins could probably speak better to this than I could, but I don't think any of our parks or downtown green spaces are under threat of development. And were anything like that ever to be considered, there's a very lengthy process for that. So I guess I would say, yes, it can help protect green spaces in some way, but there's another process that is underway that is really focused on those larger green spaces within the community.
so outside of those larger spaces and things that we think about with natural features protection overlay that exists in our city, parks are like any other use, right? You can zone it. It doesn't mean it will come, right? So if we allow for, a grocery store to happen in a location, it doesn't mean that the market or property owner are going to necessarily do that specific use. And so what we've done is, think about where park space on a lot is most appropriate in the downtown. In downtown 1, we have the advantage of having very wide sidewalks, which serve as the public space in that area. And the lots really form, that street wall going down to frame that. And then parks are permitted in downtown 2 and 3. Does not necessarily mean a new one will happen. It just means that they're allowed there. Zoning can impact preservation of natural features. And again, that's that separate process that the city approved a couple of years ago and is working on updating, which is the natural features protection overlay, which says, this property is a property that's going to be developed, but we need to have you think about that development project in another way because you have features on the sides that are sensitive and need some additional protection.
And I'd add too, in the very core of downtown, a lot of our green space and plant features are, street trees. We're certainly committed to having great street trees. Those are required within the site plan review process. And then things like planters and beds. And, you could look to the project that Kurt and his team worked on for what those features would look like in a project that has been developed recently downtown.
And I guess from the perspective that the city parks are protected under state law. Once a city designates a park and it's under our control, it's going to likely stay a park unless it goes through a process to you take it out of the definition of a park. So in that regard, city parks are going to be protected. The other thing that should be mentioned about green space is that it doesn't necessarily have to be at the ground level. Green space, although it would not be generally used by the public, there's green space can be on the top of buildings in terms of green roofs, in terms of some amenities. I believe the development at the corner of Rose and Level has some limited green space on the top on the roof, and I'm assuming there may be some restaurants who would be willing to do, again, that farm to table approach like they do in some larger cities, is to have raised beds on roofs where, again, that can be supported, and maybe have apiaries and the like up high. We wouldn't necessarily see them, but that would add to the ambiance of downtown. And there may be some park areas or I guess I'll say passive green spaces where people who live within the building could enjoy.
Great, thank you all. The next question is, how will these changes affect property values? And I thought, since the company that Kurt is currently working for is undertaking development projects downtown, and they seem quite comfortable with the proposed ordinance amendments, maybe Kurt could start off with this. So again, how will these changes affect property values?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so I can try to speak to it from our perspective on it. So we have invested in downtown and hope to do more. And the zoning is one way to help protect property values, in a sense, where this new zoning provides predictability. If we invest in a new project on a certain block and commit to build the building in what we feel is the proper format up close to the sidewalk, with either residential stoops or commercial use on the first floor and appropriate materials. But then our neighbor across the street decides to build a setback from the road, say a drive-through establishment with lots of driveways, minimal sidewalks, minimal transparency and connectivity to the street. That can certainly have a negative impact on the property values in the long run. So from our standpoint, having predictability with the zoning is certainly helpful in protecting what we've invested in. And I don't know the approach that the question's being asked. Is it going to increase property values? I think it helps to stabilize property values, is I guess how I would view it. It could, because it creates a set of standards that are known versus a zoning code now that's focused on uses that could create a variety of building types. This one sets in the standards the type of buildings that would be there. So hopefully that provides some background, at least from our perspective, on how that might be approached. But I don't necessarily see it being something that would spike values or cause them to decline. It creates some predictability and some stability.
Kurt, I want to add to that just real quick too. I know that can be a fear, that people are worried that, their values are going to go up very quickly and then their taxes will spike. It's important to remember that we have the Headley Amendment to the state constitution that was passed back in 1979 that limits how quickly taxes can go up. So they can only go up, I believe it's 2.5% a year, or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. So regardless if values go up quickly, property taxes are not, they won't, they can't. So it's an important consideration. And I would also, I would add, the city and this city and many other cities found itself, and many continue to find themselves, in really challenging times when it comes to municipal revenues. And the one asset that a city has is its land. And it's really critical that that's used wisely and used well, particularly within a downtown. So that's why having those denser uses in the core really help provide that revenue that can provide the services that benefit the whole city.
So I would like to just add one more piece to that. This is a really common question that we get whenever we are talking about rezoning work. And, you know, the question of how it impacts property values. And from my conversations with the city assessor, there are a variety of factors that go into creating a property value, right? And zoning is one piece of many. And, you know, the general of thumb that I have been given is that, you know, especially when you're moving from similar district to similar district, you know, that's not going to make an impact in the calculation of all the factors. And so in this situation, you know, we're talking about one downtown district that allows a variety of development, and moving to one that also allows a variety of development and a variety of uses, albeit in a slightly different way.
And if anything, go ahead, Andrew.
You go ahead, Kurt. I'll go after.
I was going to say, I mean, this zoning is designed to create a better match of existing context of the neighborhood. So now you've got this blanket zoning where a variety of types of projects, whether they really fit within that specific, whether say it's a fringe downtown area or not, the zoning permits it now. So having this more specific type of zoning that recognizes downtown 1, downtown 2, downtown 3 as we go from the core to less dense to a little less dense. It's going to help protect that context too, like you mentioned, Christina, as we go from different types of uses to better reflect what's there already right now.
Yeah, I was just going to make another comment, and it was kind of the first thing that I talked about when I was hitting those slides at the start, is that, you know, zoning doesn't drive demand or development necessarily. It just helps craft what it is. I mean, you could put very progressive urban zoning on some big slice of Death Valley in California. It doesn't mean development's coming. So, but it does help guide and make sure we have the right development that, again, is consistent with what the community has said they wanted in the master plan.
Thank you. Thank you. And looking at the time, we have a few minutes left here, and we did not get to all the questions tonight. So there will be a posting online of the remaining questions with written responses that'll be going up early next week. And you can look for that on the imaginekalamazoo.com location, or just go to the City of Kalamazoo website, and there will be a pop-up on the homepage that will also direct you there. But we want to thank all our panelists tonight for participating. And I'd like to also mention that the next step in this process involves a public hearing at the Planning Commission. This will occur Thursday, October 1st at 7 p.m. And there'll be there already is notices going out on that. So that will be the next opportunity for additional public feedback. Christina, would you like to add anything else to that, the plan for October 1st?
Sure, just to say that again, you know, we know it's a lot of information, and zoning can be can sometimes be a little complicated if it's not something that you do every day. So check it out on imaginekalamazoo.com, the projects page, downtown zoning, and then, you know, my contact information is on there. We have an engagement hotline for folks to call who want to learn more about any of our projects that are going on. You know, you can always reach me, and I'm happy to walk you through any pieces as we start to move forward to get to Plan Commission and ultimately City Commission review and approval. Andrew?
I'm going to put one little shameless plug in here, since I'm assuming everyone that is watching has some interest in downtown. We did just launch a brand new downtown website at downtownkalamazoo.org, and have been sharing information on zoning updates and other stuff. So please follow us there. There's a lot of relevant information.
Thank you. Okay, well, we appreciate our
City
sorry, go ahead, Clyde.
There are some people who might catch me on this. I've said something about hemp and CBD being regulated by the Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency. I misspoke. CBD and industrial hemp is regulated by the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. I just wanted to make sure I corrected that statement.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I'm sure somebody would have brought that up. We have a lot of marijuana experts in the community now. So again, we appreciate everybody's time. We appreciate you tuning in to watch this tonight and listen to this program. And please feel free to reach out to the Community Planning and Economic Development Department with additional feedback. And like I said, we've got a Planning Commission meeting coming up on October 1st at 7 p.m. And you can provide additional feedback at that time also. Thank you.
Thank you.